This week on the Frame Savers, we pour one out for Willie. This is episode 66 of the Frame Savers. How is everybody doing? We are live right now on twitch.tv/theframesavers. What up to our chat? If you are new to us, we are a retro video game podcast that focuses on speedrunning. Speedrunning is a hobby where we try to beat video games as quickly as possible using whatever available glitches or tricks that we can find. And this week we were talking about a really awesome game, Final Fantasy Adventure for the Game Boy. You all know I love the Game Boy, so obviously I have pushed this game into our list, and I'm excited to talk about it. Before we dive into that, Chad, how are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing pretty good. I was really tempted when I was telling people about this episode to drop, a slight surprise. It's another Game Boy game.
Yeah, I like Game Boy games.
We really do like Game Boy games around here.
They're very portable.
They are
nice.
So what have you been up to lately?
I've worked a little bit on this game, actually. I've been doing temps of any percent with warps in this game. And then also I'm learning Kid Dracula on the Game Boy, which is a lot of fun.
That's a really good game.
I just started on that. It is a really good game.
I
was like, I could do a pocket on that. And then I was like, oh no, Chad did a pocket on the NES one already. So
yeah, when I used to run the Famicom one, that was back when Starvin Struthers and Dusler used to run Game Boy all the time. And so we would have pretty regular disagreements on which was the better version.
Yeah, they're both really good. I don't know. I think I played the Game Boy one first, so I probably like it a bit more, and it's a little bit shorter of a run, so that's cool. But they're both. I mean, it's a good port of a good game. So,
Definitely.
What have you been doing?
I've been mostly doing A Link to the Past. I've been derusting Cookie and Cream for submission to SGDQ. We've got SGDQ submissions very, very much imminent. They just recently opened up as of recording this and closed just as soon. So
holy heck, yeah, this isn't on the list, but was it like 10 minutes?
Oh my goodness, yeah. So this
registration.
This is definitely a new record for registration. So for those of you who don't know, AGDQ 2018. When registration opened up for AGDQ 2018, it was 1,850 slots for the event, and it completely booked up in 22 hours, which was unprecedented in less than a day.
People were freaking out about that.
Yeah, everyone had freaked out about how quickly it sold out. It was the first time this had ever happened. In almost every event previous to this, registration was at least open a week before it was starting to hit its cap. And so for AGDQ, it tapped out in 22 hours. This one, they're trying to respond to how quickly it was selling out by doing registration in 2 phases. So the first phase of it just opened the other day, and it's 1,000 slots, and the second phase will open on March 10th, and that's 1,250 slots for a total of 2,250 slots total. This one was open for 16 minutes total. It was open from 7:55 p.m. until it finally sold out at 8:11 p.m. And everyone was just like so shocked by how quickly it sold out. But honestly, it's starting to become kind of an arms race. Speedrunning is becoming more mainstream. People want to get in and participate. They hear about how fun the events are, and so I mean, this is the way it's going.
I'm definitely worried about like people not being able to go, and like, what if someone was working at that time? I don't know. It's at a different level now. I don't want it to be like getting Coldplay tickets or something.
People equated it to Ticketmaster. People made that comparison.
It was crazy. So I'm sure they'll figure it out. I don't think anyone expected quite the response that was experienced. But
I think the next phase will be less cutthroat. I think that this is probably more or less isolated to phase 1, just because everyone was trying to get their tickets in the first phase. I think the second phase will be less cutthroat, but we're probably looking at only a few hours, not like days.
Yeah. So let's say you missed out on your GDQ ticket, right? And you're bummed about it.
Right.
This is what we call a segue in the professional business.
What
kind of things could you have to watch coming up that might help,
ease
help
the pain.
Get over what happened to you? Yeah.
Yeah, so we have Speedrunning Expo coming up. Speedrunning Expo 2018 is going to take place from March 27th to April 1st. I'm not really sure what the submission process for that is, but I'm fairly certain, at least based on past events, that it's a co-located marathon, so it's a offline marathon in the sense that people actually travel to this thing. The stream itself is going to take place on stream.me/speedrunning expo. For reasons historically, they've migrated off of Twitch, and so they're on the stream.me streaming platform. But you can definitely check that out. And I really don't know enough about the submission process to know whether or not it's open or closed, but you can definitely check that out when you hear this if you're interested in maybe participating in that. There's also the German Speedrun Marathon,
The
GSM.
Germans.
Yeah, they run a pretty tight ship over there. I'm going to be honest with you. Theirs is March 28th through the beginning of April. I'm not sure how many days into April it goes. But this one, I can guarantee, with German efficiency being what it is, they've almost certainly closed registration.
It's already over. It's actually already over. The event's already over before
yeah,
it
they
started.
they already recorded it, and they're just going to broadcast it on March 28th. It's a finely oiled machine. They're already preparing for GSM 2019. So if you want to find out more information about that marathon, you can find that out at speedrun.com/GSM_2018. That is pretty much the hub for all the information. You can find the schedule there and the stream there as well.
Yeah, there's also another event called Retrothon, which is coming up in April 22nd. I mention it because submissions close March. It says March 1st, but I think it's March 7th. I think they're still open, but for only a few more days. So we figured we'd mention it. But that's going to be on twitch.tv/retro gaming live TV, who we've talked about a bit. That's where Chad streams on there sometimes. I used to stream on there sometimes. So they're friends of ours, and you can find that April 22nd. But it looks like they close March 17th for submissions. So that is like a week-long celebration of all things retro, anything from Atari to Dreamcast is what it says. So that should be pretty cool. So a lot of events coming up that, I guess we're starting to hit that season, the season of events. So that's
There's
cool.
a lot of stuff on our list. As usual, I try to remind you guys, we don't have the ability to really plug everything that's going on the podcast itself, but I do try to keep a fairly well-maintained list on our Discord. So if you want to check out our Discord, for additional stuff, we have a whole list of all the marathons going on, big and small, and you can find the entire list there. So check out our website, www.theframesavers.com, if you want to link to our Discord to check out everything that's going on so you don't miss any of it.
Absolutely. So this week we are talking about Final Fantasy Adventure. Why are we talking about Final Fantasy Adventure, Chad?
Well, this is a game that John
probably supposed to answer this question, huh?
Yeah, but this is a game John really loves. I remember it was really actually interesting. One of the things about GDQ that a lot of people don't know is there is a lot of downtime, and whereas that sort of downtime is filled with panels and booths and things like that at typical conventions, GDQ is not really a convention in that sense. And so there's TV set up all over the place for people to just practice games, play games casually, do whatever they want to really at any hour of the day. And so John, with his sleep schedule being what it was at the time and filling time, he actually devoted quite a lot of his time at GDQ to learning this run specifically. I would wake up, every afternoon to him saying, yeah, I worked on Final Fantasy Adventure for another few hours. So
yeah, it was cool. Opus has a tutorial for any percent for this game, which is always really nice when a community has like a resource like that. You can go and learn the run and have somebody explain everything instead of just watching it. Just watching the run and trying to figure it out on your own. So I never really learned games at GDQ, and I was like, well, when we're in the practice room, I should learn a game. So this is a game that I actually had never played before until like 2 months ago. I've seen it. I've actually followed Bowie, the hero, who we'll talk about, but he is a really big advocate of this. He helped out a ton with some research and explaining some things for this podcast. But I followed him for years and watched the run, and it seemed like a cool game. I've always loved Zelda, but I just never got around to playing it. And for Game Boy Quest, I finally buckled down and spent, the 10, 11 hours it took me to beat it. And it was a really fun time. And then, I decided to check out what the speedrun was like and kind of really started to like it. So I figured, why not now? No better time than the present to talk about Final Fantasy Adventure.
Yeah, I kind of had the opposite experience in the sense that I was aware of Bowie for a long time, but I didn't follow him until quite recently. But one of my good friends, Opus, from Zelda 2, he actually worked on this game. So he had the 80% record fairly briefly. He was doing a big grind for it, and I remember watching him play this like late at night, most nights for a few months straight. He was really working hard on this game, and this game can be a pretty brutal speed run, as we'll talk about later.
Absolutely.
So it was a pretty in-depth process watching him try to take the record from, I think at the time it was El Magus still had it, or it might have been Bowie at the time. But Opus finally did get the world record, and it was a pretty exciting thing to watch. So you and I both
Yeah.
actually have history watching this run, which is kind of neat.
Yeah, Opus is the one who made the tutorial, and then actually Bowie just got the world record back within the past month or so. So it's a pretty active time for the game. So not that many runners of the game. The leaderboard's fairly sparse. So maybe this podcast can inspire some people to pick it up, learn it. At least just learn it and get a bad run in, bump me up the leaderboard, make what I've done look more impressive. That would be great. So we're gonna go ahead and take a quick break, listen to some fresh music, and then I'm gonna tell you all things Final Fantasy Adventure. So Final Fantasy Adventure is a pretty awesome and interesting game. It has a kind of varied history. You might think, oh, Final Fantasy on the Game Boy. Well, there are 4 Final Fantasy games on the Game Boy, and none of them are actually Final Fantasy games. So Final Fantasy Legend 1, 2, and 3 is part of. Do you remember what series that is? It's the
Um,
Shin Megami Tensei. No,
oh,
is it that
is it related
series
to the
or?
Megami Tensei series?
Or the no, I can't remember what it is, but this is related to the Mana series, the Seiken Densetsu series. So
Yeah,
this was released in 1991 in Japan as Seiken Densetsu, Final Fantasy Gaiden. Oh, the Saga series was the legend. Thank
right.
you. And in North America in 1991 as well. In 1993 in Europe, so 2 years later, they always get kind of the raw end of the deal in that sense. And it was actually known as Mystic Quest there to even further confuse the fact that we got a Super Nintendo game called Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, which isn't this game.
Yeah,
So,
I talked a little bit about that in my pocket on Final Fantasy Mystic Quest.
yeah.
It's really a strange history that neither of those games are really true Final Fantasy games in any sense. And so it's kind of funny that they both got the Mystic Quest title. It had to have been really confusing to be a kid in the 1990s.
Yeah, and it's weird because they're all made by like Square and they have Final Fantasy aspects to it. For example, Final Fantasy Adventure has chocobos in it, stuff like that. So like it's not completely separate from the Final Fantasy series, but it's not really a true Final Fantasy game, which is kind of funny.
I wonder
And
how
so
many of those
basically,
things. I wonder how many of those things got borrowed into the series in the same way, like in the same spirit where we've borrowed a lot into the Mario series from Doki Doki Panic. So
mhm.
things like Pokies and Birdo and all of those little elements that we sort of take for granted as being Mario characters really were borrowed from Super Mario, or were borrowed from Doki Doki Panic. I wonder how much, like, whether or not the Chocobo is like truly owned by the Mana series and just kind of got adopted into Final Fantasy from that association.
Well, chocobos had already existed in the NES games,
Okay,
correct?
I
For
I
Final
don't
Fantasy.
remember.
So yeah, I think they did. So what's interesting though at this is, so this is marketed as a Final Fantasy title, basically to probably help sell, copies of it. But and it was originally developed under the title Gemma Knights or Gemma Knights, and it's the first of the Mana video game series. I didn't realize how many Mana video games there were actually. I think of Secret of Mana, and then I know this is the prequel, but there's like a whole ton of them. And so the creator of the Mana series is Koichi Ishii, and he says, I don't even know if I know what this means, but I got this quote. I thought it was interesting. Mana is not a game series, but a world which is illustrated and can be explored through video games. And I
That's
got
deep.
that from the
That
Mana
is
wiki.
that is
Yeah,
layered.
it's
That
very
is
deep.
deep and layered.
but I guess what it was trying to say is that he never intended to make like a series per se, but he wanted to create this universe, like this world, and then all those games take place in that universe. So I think that's kind of interesting.
Star Wars is
Um,
not a movie series. It's just a universe in which we illustrate it through
yeah,
the series of movies.
yeah, it's confusing. It's very deep. It's very deep. And so in Japan, this series is known as Seiken Densetsu or Holy Sword Legend. And so there's a whole bunch of these games. So this is the first one of the Mana series. Then there's Secret of Mana that came out on the Super Nintendo in 1993. There's a Seiken Densetsu 3, which came out in 1995 only in Japan. There's a Legend of Mana, which came out PS1 in 1999. Sword of Mana, which is the remake of this game, Final Fantasy Adventure, I believe in for the GBA in 2003. And then there's PS2 titles, there's two DS titles. A game even came out on the Vita in 2016. So like this is still a relevant series. Along with that, there was a collection for the Switch, like a Seiken Densetsu collection for the Switch that I believe only came out in Japan. But the Switch is not region locked, so you could import it and play it. And then they just came out with, oh, I believe, yeah, it's actually out at this point. I think when whatever I was reading was written, it wasn't, but there's an HD remaster of of Mana that just came out in 2018.
I
So
think
the series
while
is
we're
active.
I think while we're recording this, RPG Limit Break is currently doing a race of the Secret of Mana HD remaster.
Yeah, because I Crowley, who runs Final Fantasy Adventure, is the world record holder for Secret of Mana, and I notice he also is the world record holder of Secret of Mana parentheses 2018, which I assume is the remake. So people have already been running that as well. But this series, I mean, I think it had more of a success in Japan, but it still exists. I mean, I think a lot of people played Secret of Mana for sure. What's interesting is the first Seiken Densetsu game that they were going to make. It's called Seiken Densetsu: The Emergence of Excalibur, and this was trademarked back in 1987, so 4 years before this Game Boy game came out, and it was going to be a really ambitious. Famicom Disk System game. It was going to have 5 total floppy disks, which is like unheard of for a Famicom Disk System game. But it got kind of canceled in kind of the early stages of development, and customers were, I guess there were pre-orders even back then, but customers refunded their money and told to look for an upcoming game called Final Fantasy. So this was before Final Fantasy 1 came out on the Famicom. So kind of an interesting story there, just kind of how that ties in. So what is a mana game? Like, what makes a game a mana game versus a Final Fantasy game? I kind of wanted to define that because, like, I don't have a lot of experience with the series outside of this game. So these games all have real time battle instead of turn based RPG combat. So think of the Legend of Zelda, top down, slashing your sword, actually attacking enemies. In the later games, there's a common ring command menu system. If you've ever played Secret of Mana, you kind of pull up a circle around your character that you can rotate through, kind of like a rotary phone, and you can pick which magic attack you want to use or items or whatever, and you do that kind of in live action while you're fighting stuff. Actually isn't present in Final Fantasy Adventure, but it's a common thread in the others. And then there's kind of all these plot devices that are used in the mana games. So I'll kind of talk about those in general and then the story, I guess, for this specific game. But the mana tree is a big part of the mana series. It's the source of magic that sustains the balance and nature of the mana world. So it's a pretty important tree. Pretty important. The mana sword is typically used to restore the balance of the world or whatever. Basically, when this balance is lost with the tree, and then a member of the mana family becomes a seed to create a new seed if the mana tree dies. Spoilers to the end of this game if you might want to fast forward or whatever, but yeah, this kind of begins the adventure. And then a sprout of the tree is called a gemma, or gemma. So the gemma knights are those who protect the tree and wield the mana sword, and so that's what this game was going to be called, the gemma knights or whatever, initially. So
I think I
those
kept
kind of,
reading that as Gamma Knights, but now I see that it's definitely not
yeah,
Gamma, it's Gemma.
yeah. um I guess I don't know how that's supposed to be pronounced, but we'll just pronounce it however we feel like as it comes up. So this is kind of the lore that you must respect for the Mana series. You got to respect the lore, right?
Right.
This so I'll try and be quick with this story. Like the tough thing about doing a game like this is, like, I mean, this game took me 10 and a half hours to beat casually. So like there's a lot of content here, and even more so than like like Link's Awakening or anything like that. This game has a lot of characters. It has more dialogue. You can go into towns and talk to NPCs, and like it's not super in depth, obviously. Like it's very similar to any other 8-bit RPG where like everyone in town says one thing, and like most of it's repeating whatever other people said and like establishing the world. But it's still a lot of stuff happens in this game throughout the plot, and I recommend going and playing it. But the basic premise is that you are Sumo. Now you can name the character whatever you want. I didn't realize the character's name is Sumo, but in the lore the character's name is Sumo and the girl's name is Fuji. So I didn't know that until I did the
I
research for
always
this.
love discovering RPG characters' intended names
Yeah,
because
like
you almost
who
never
knows?
have an opportunity to know what that was. Like very rarely does a text box where it says, name your character, does it come pre-filled with like their intended name. So it's
Yeah.
always really funny. Like,
Later games, like PlayStation games, it did, but like,
right,
yeah,
right.
old school games, you have no idea.
Yeah, for like Final Fantasy V, when I found out that the main character's name was intended to be Butts, I just really enjoyed that.
That's a great thing to enjoy. I completely understand. So I named the characters A and A because it's faster than letting the text load.
When I
So I
played it
think of them
casually,
both
I
as
named
A.
them Off and John.
Wow. Was I the girl?
Yeah.
Nice. That's a really weird. I don't know how to process that live on this stream, so I'm just gonna move on. So the game starts off. You're a gladiator, kind of like the movie Gladiator. You're in a arena fighting animals for the entertainment of the Dark Lord, but you escape, and we say pour one out for Willie because literally 15 seconds in the game has its first death, and there's a lot of characters die in this game. Like I can think of at least 3 on the top of my head that die in the game, and 2 of them are in the first 5 minutes of the game. So they didn't really make you attached to these characters, I feel like, by the fact that you didn't talk to them until they were dead. So, but literally 15 seconds in, Willie dies, and he tells you to go do some stuff, and that's where you start learning things. But
I asked John
I
if
always
we
feel
ever
bad for
eventually
Willie.
find out who Willie was. Like, do we
No,
later get attached to him after he was dead? But the answer is apparently no, so.
I don't think so. I every time in my chat, I just go, we got so attached to him, and like the Bible thumps come, it's a sad time. So it's like if Aerith, spoilers, Final Fantasy
Oh
VII
my
from 30
god.
years ago, if Aerith died like the first 10 minutes of the game, you're just like, okay, I don't know. I mean, I didn't know who that was, but anyways,
It's
you
okay. We
escape. You
already
over
did
here.
our Final Fantasy VII
Yeah,
episode, so we
if
insist
you
that people
haven't
listen to
binged
these
your way
chronologically.
through, yeah, if you guys haven't binged your way through, then you're not true fans. So you overhear the Dark Lord and Julius planning on tapping into the power of the Mana Tree, and as you travel a little bit of ways, basically he knocks you off a waterfall. It's very intense, but you end up okay. I mean, you can survive a fall. You find this girl Fuji, who's with this man named Hasim, who also dies. So Bible thumbs for Hasim, who again we didn't know until he was on his deathbed. But she has a pendant that will unlock basically the powers of being able to get to the mana tree. It's up this waterfall, and also she's a descendant of the mana line or whatever. And so you basically, I won't go through with all the details of the story because that would just be boring, but essentially the story unfolds with this Julius character who is a Vandal, which is an empire that tried to control the mana tree. So this is also a theme throughout the like one of the main final bosses of Secret of Mana is a Vandal. And the Dark Lords keep trying to kidnap Fuji to use this pendant to get to the mana tree, and you keep trying to rescue her, and then things happen, then you have to go do this because this happened.
Tale as old as
And
time.
yeah, so that's the basic premise is Julius and them are trying to tap into the mana tree, and you are trying to save Fuji and the pendant and protect mana forever.
Because of
So
its delicious maple
also,
syrup.
before I move on from this story section, I just want to say PS there's a robot chocobo. So one of the older Geminites is like he's like a hermit. He has to ride a chocobo at one point and crushes the chocobo's legs, which is a really disturbing thing to think about. And then this professor scientist guy builds the chocobo, robotic legs, and you end up with the chocobo, robocobo.
Robobokobo.
Yeah, which is awesome, and it can walk on water, which is great. But how awesome is that? Robot chocobo.
Basically living the life.
Yeah. So that's all. That's a long. That probably wasn't the most interesting segment we've done, but if you like mana, get into it, and you probably would have been mad if I didn't talk about the story. So it's an RPG. What do you got? What do you want from me?
So this game does have a lot of pretty standard RPG elements, but in general, it does play top down in sort of a Zelda-like combat action system. So you're typically just running around the screen with enemies around you, and rather than fighting in turn-based combat, you're swinging your sword or whatever weapon you have equipped at that time and dealing the damage necessary to kill them. You can find new weapons which serve various purposes in the game, such as damage dealing and interacting with the environment. So, for instance, there's axes you can use to cut down trees. There's sickles you can use to cut down plants. There's a chain you can use to pull yourself across gaps, things like that. There is a relatively straightforward experience system. It's pretty easy to understand without reading much about it. So once you gain enough experience, a little screen pops up and it says you've leveled up and all of your HP and MP are restored. And in addition, it shows you all of your stats in front of you and then asks you whether or not you'd like to focus on power, stamina, wisdom, or will. And while none of these really are super clear what they mean when you read them, it does kind of explain it to you fairly straightforward. So when you see power and you select it, it shows you that it would increase your attack significantly and your defense slightly, and it asks you, is this what you want to do? So it's pretty easy to assess what it does, but in general, the power focuses mostly on your attack strength, the stamina focuses mostly on your health, the wisdom focuses mostly on your magic points, and the will changes. I think it's the rate of is it the size of your charge meter, or is it the rate
The
at which it
rate that it
refills?
fills up. It's the
Okay.
rate that it fills up. So you have a will meter at the bottom of the screen. This is kind of an interesting mechanic for the game. So you're going around slashing your sword or your axe or whatever. If your will meter is completely empty, you do 1 times damage. You do basic damage. If it's all the way full, you do 2 times damage. If you get that will meter all the way full and use your physical attack, and it also adds different elements to your physical attack. So for example, if you have an axe, it'll throw the axe across the screen versus just slashing it. With magic attacks, I found out it actually is 4 times the damage. So if you can fill up your will meter all the way to the top, you're doing 4 times as much damage, and that actually becomes interesting because there's 2 major different types of routes for the warpless speed run. One based around attack, one based around magic. So it's a really cool kind of system that you can use that gets exploited. Also, much like any other RPG, you learn various spells throughout the game. So you learn like a cure spell, a fire spell, an ice spell, and you have magic points as well that just like a typical RPG you use up, and can do these different skills. Also throughout the game you run into additional characters. Like I said, it is fairly story driven, and you'll run into these different characters that'll ask you if, sometimes they'll ask you if you want them to join you. Sometimes it's like an option, you can skip it or not. Sometimes it's part of the plot, but each one of these characters has like different abilities that help you. So if you pull up the main menu, you can go to ask, and the ask command is different for each one. So if you have Fuji with you, anytime you ask, she'll start slowly regenerating your health for a certain amount of
Which is
time.
really
um,
handy.
it's really handy. And what's interesting in the speed run, which we could talk about later, is you're supposed to lose her. She's supposed to get kidnapped, blah blah blah. But because of the way we glitch through the game, we have her for the whole game. So we have this healing person for a large part of the game that we're not supposed to, which is cool. Yeah, and then basically I think if you think of it like kind of a Metroidvania, a lot of the map unlocks depending on the different types of weapons you get. For example, there's a chain, like a chain whip that you get, and that'll let you connect to posts and kind of pull across different gaps that you couldn't normally. An axe will cut down trees, and the sickle will cut through bushes. So usually like you'll find an area that you can't get past, and eventually you'll go to a dungeon and get a weapon that'll let you get through there. So similar to Zelda, similar to a lot of these type of games, which is cool. And there's also a lot of puzzle aspects that exist in the dungeon. So usually you go through a dungeon. There's a couple of puzzles. There's a lot of hidden walls. There's a lot of destroying walls, kind of like destroying bombs in Zelda. With you use an axe thing called a matic. I don't know what that. I don't know if that's a poor translation or it's just
Matic.
whatever.
It's a type of
Matic.
like pickaxe.
Oh, well, you learn something new every day. So the matic, some people call it the matlock, lets you like you swing it at walls and you hope that they break open or not. So there's a lot of that going throughout the different rooms, but most of the puzzles are pretty simple in this. Like I would say that's one strength of like a Zelda game that this doesn't have. I think Zelda's always been really innovative with its puzzles and interesting, and these are all kind of cut and dry puzzles. And there's also some very obtuse puzzles in the game. There's one that will definitely hold up most casual playthroughs for like a good 30 minutes to an hour, just because it basically makes no sense. And I think the translation of some NPCs makes it even more obtuse. Like I think they're supposed to tell you what to do, but they don't tell you what to do. So
I was
it's kind
actually kind
of
of
good
impressed
gameplay.
by sort of the in-dungeon puzzle aspects. Things like, you encounter a room that's got ice in it, for instance, and you're trying to hit the switches, but you have to figure out how to sort of navigate around it using the blocks and the
Mhm.
ice correctly. Like, it was very simple, very straightforward.
Yeah.
I didn't really get stuck on it per se, but it was just kind of interesting to see little puzzles built out of the very simplistic elements that they had.
Yeah, I would say that. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Like they're not difficult puzzles that'll hold you up, but they're kind of clever, I guess, in some ways. A lot of the puzzles involve freezing enemies and then using them to push onto these different like trigger blocks and stuff. And it's really funny because whenever you freeze the enemy, they become this like really adorable snowman, no matter who you freeze. And it's just kind of like a funny like thing that's constantly throughout the game. You're getting these snowmen sprites that are like adorable, but they're like a key part of saving the world. Find this dragon, and you hit him with that. Now he's a cute snowman. I don't know. I think it's funny. This game was really well received. So I have this Nintendo Power issue 100 we've referenced a few times. It's fun to look at because it's like a snapshot of like what did they think about video games at this point, and this is like at the zenith of N64. So like the top games, Mario 64, and second best is Link to the Past. So this game was rated 66th on that list of best games for Nintendo, which is pretty good for all systems. It was the sixth highest rated Game Boy game. So that's really pretty high.
Which feels
IGN gave
generous.
this.
I feel like I can name quite a lot of Game Boy games that.
Well, you'd be interested by the list above it too, because the list above it is like number one was Tetris, that makes sense. Number two was Link's Awakening, but then in between was Dr. Mario and Golf and one other that I can't remember, but they
Golf
weren't.
for the Game Boy made higher than Final
Yeah,
Fantasy
it's
Adventure.
an interesting list. It's an interesting list. I'll tell you that.
Wow.
I'll tell you that. I think like International Superstar Soccer 64 beat out like Mega Man X and some stuff. It's an interesting list for sure.
Now I want to enjoy this list.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that should be my next pocket. Maybe I should just go through this top 100 list because it is kind of fun to look at. But IGN gave this a 9 out of 10. RPG Fan gave it a 92%, and they said possibly the best thing that ever happened to Game Boy, which is I think that's about as high a praise as it can go. I don't know why that's only 92%. Then
Yeah,
seems like that should be
seriously.
100. But there were some criticisms concerning the role playing gameplay. Like IGN said, they felt like the role playing gameplay didn't fit well with the action oriented nature of the game. But for the most part, this game's always been really well received and well beloved, and obviously spawned off this series that a lot of people really like. So a series that I am just very new to right now. I've never played Secret of Mana. I've never played any of these games except for this one, and that was new a month ago. So I'm welcomed into the lore now. So
You're an
what
expert at this point.
yeah, do you have any thoughts about what we talked about? Any mana tree thoughts or no?
It's actually kind of astounding to me that I've made it this far, having never really played Secret of Mana, and now I haven't played Final
Yeah.
Fantasy Adventure, which is Seiken Densetsu 1. So, like, I've managed to completely miss this entire series, which certainly is more popular in Japan than it is in the US,
Yeah.
but still, I feel like Secret of Mana is pretty well loved by retro gaming fans, so it's kind of surprising to me that I've made it this far without having played really any of the big name action RPGs from the SNES. I mean, I've only played probably like half of Chrono Trigger. I've never played Terranigma. I've never played Secret of Mana. I feel
Yeah,
like
we're
I've missed
both
out on a lot of stuff.
failures. We're both failures.
There's only so many
What
hours in the day. I can't play every single game that I'm supposed to have
but
played.
how much time have you spent playing like Secret Scout or something that could have been like, "Oh, I beat Chrono Trigger today." It's like, "No, I played Secret Scout. I tried to figure out how to beat it."
I mean,
You
you
know?
raise an interesting point.
These are the decisions that we've made. These are the lots that we've cast. So, anyways, I would say I recommend this game. It's a lot of fun. So we'll go ahead and take a quick break and do our ratings, and I'll tell you why it's such a good game.
As usual, before we jump into our speedrun discussion, we're going to talk a little bit about our ratings for the game. So we're going to talk about, as usual, the graphics, music and sound, controls and gameplay, difficulty and fairness, a little bit about fun and replayability, some miscellaneous thoughts, and then at the end, give an overall rating from 0 to 10. We tend to use the whole scale. This isn't, just paid ratings between 7 and 10. We've given games, I think John has famously given a game a 0.5 so far, and we've definitely given a few games 10s, but we definitely tend to go the whole range. So
it's tough though, because these games are, most of the games we're going to do an episode on are going to be at least a 6 or 7, right? So like most of it is 6 to 10, but we do bad games episodes to try and balance it out. And
but it doesn't balance it out because we still give those like 6s and 4s.
Not
and
me.
5s.
No, that's you. That's your problem. Don't you
I
put
am
your sickness on
I am
me.
a well-known bad games apologist.
Don't you put your sickness on me.
All right, so starting off with graphics. So I actually grew up with Final Fantasy Legend, which this shares a lot of the art style with. I don't know if that was intentional or if it's just me remembering back to the Game Boy Final Fantasy days.
Pretty similar.
And as well as some of the sprites are directly lifted off of Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, which only serves to compound the confusion between the European name of this game, Mystic Quest, and the actual game, Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. So it's kind of a mess. But that is all to say that this game's
I just
graphics...
like to say there are like 3 to 4 series like in the retro video game world that are like so incestuous that it's like impossible to figure out what is what. Like the Wonder Boy whatever series, which we've had to go through that for too. And anytime one of those games comes up, like for the podcast, I'm like, because I could read it for a day, and then like you could ask me a week later, and I'm like, I don't know which one's which, because like it's just so confusing. Like what's a Wonder Boy game? What's Adventure Island? I don't know what they are. This is kind of in that vein, I feel like.
Yeah, I totally agree. So just talking about the graphics, first off, I think that what they did with the Game Boy is actually quite impressive. They're great graphics for being, locked into 8-bit Game Boy. I would say that it does a good job at what it is. Everything is pretty easily conveying the right thing. You've got 4 colors to work with, so good luck in the first place, and they managed to still make it look visually interesting. It breaks it up. I'm never confused when they enter a new world. Like when watching a video of this, I can tell what's supposed to be desert, what's supposed to be snow, what's supposed to be, rocks and trees and grass. Like for Game Boy, that's honestly the highest compliment you can give, is that it's pretty distinctive.
Yeah, it's like tile based, Zelda like graphics. Some of the sprite work is really good. Like there's a lot of very large bosses in this game, like a lot of them, and they all look really good. It's got a lot of different characters that are all distinctly recognizable from each other, which is always impressive. The size of your character is a good size for the screen, which is always a big Game Boy issue. Like I don't feel like you're cramped in a lot of screens, and like you said, all the varied places. I mean, it does have a fairly large world map, and all of the places are pretty recognizable from each other. So I mean, I wouldn't say it's anything crazy, but I mean, for 1991 and for Game Boy, like these graphics are solid, and I enjoy them. I find them quite pleasing.
There's certainly nothing there that's detracting from the game.
Yeah, for sure. What do you think of the music?
So when I was playing it, I thought it fit really well, and then I went to listen to some of the music tracks after the fact, and everything felt super samey despite the number of tracks there are. So there's a ton of different tracks in the game if you look it up. Like trying to find music for the podcast, I found a ton of music, and I was surprised how much every single song sounded like every single other song, and not necessarily in a good way. So I would say that the music definitely could probably do to be quite a bit more varied, but I think that in general the tracks that there are good. I would just like to see more of it.
Yeah, I like the music quite a bit. I think it's really good. It never gets old when I speedrun it. I could see like it all fits in the gameplay, but yeah, maybe it doesn't stand out on its own merits. I could kind of see that, but I think it's good. It's definitely above average. It's not as good as, Ninja Gaiden Shadow for the Game Boy, or like,
I mean, for being on the Game Boy, they
Awakening
definitely
or
did well with
something.
what they had.
Yeah, I mean, there's better soundtracks on the Game Boy, but for the most part, I do like it quite a bit. I know in general it's well regarded by people who like this game. They do talk about the music quite a bit, but yeah, I would say I kind of agree with you. It's not it's not like a home run or anything, but I like it. It fits well with the gameplay. It sets that fantasy atmosphere. It's melodic and dramatic when it needs to be. It's dark and foreboding when it needs to be. It's adventurous when it needs to be. So I'm a fan of it.
For sure.
What about controls and gameplay? What did you think?
So this is one of those famous tile-based games that allows you not free movement and not full tile movement, but it sort of conforms to half tiles,
Hmm.
which I do find kind of frustrating at times. There's something about it, I don't know why, but I feel like my brain has a hard time doing the transition. You know, when you get full range of movement on a tile-based grid, obviously that's probably a harder game to program from the programming perspective, but I feel like it produces a game that's a lot easier to control. And when it's completely locked to the tile, at least I can work out what I'm supposed to do. But when the game is sort of locked to half tiles, I feel like it can be frustrating. And there's some instances in the game where that actually comes up, places where the gameplay is hindered by the controls in this sense. So for one, combat can sometimes struggle because of this. Sometimes just like figuring out how to align yourself so that, for instance, the way that your sword swings will line up with enemies can be kind of frustrating. You know, he swings the sword on the right hand side of his body, so you either have to be standing right in front of the thing or you have to be standing to the left of the thing so you hit it. But then in addition, there's a few other frustrating parts, like for instance, there's a plot point in the game where the only way to progress the plot is to sleep in this bed, but there's really no way to know that you can sleep in the bed, because unless you align yourself perfectly with the way that you climb into the bed, which is on a half tile, by the way, you can't climb into it, and so you can't progress the plot. And so I kind of had to come back to it later when someone told me, by the way, you were only a half a tile away from being able to climb in bed. Um, and there's other small things like that that kind of come up. But in general, I think that the game controls nicely. I think it's just there's a few spots where the sort of half tile mechanic can
Hmm.
be frustrating.
Yeah, I would mostly agree with you. I won't repeat, everything you just said. Just to follow up kind of more on top of that, it does have like a pretty interesting combat system. Like, so if you tap in a direction and an attack, like with your sword, you'll poke versus doing a slash. So there can be like variance in how you decide to attack enemies and how you do it. It can be manipulated in terms of like buffering inputs and stuff when you become a top level player like Bowie, to kind of mitigate some of those things. So like, if you're on that half tile and something's, right next to you, hitting it in a way where you don't have to walk into its tile as well, and being able to buffer, like, turning around and hitting something without moving into its tile. But yeah, casually it is kind of a frustration. I would say also, like, there's just a lot of little things, like enemy iframes are not visible. That can be really frustrating. You take a lot of hit back when you get hit, like way too much hit knockback when you get hit. So a lot of times you can kind of get pinballed around different screens if you're not stopping to kill lots of enemies. Really frustrating in the speed run, but even from a casual sense, you can be trying to go somewhere and just keep getting knocked back in a direction. So stuff like that can be frustrating. I think the game as a whole is really fun. I think the experience system's fun. You get it's one of those games where it's really enjoyable to get a new weapon, because unlike just like an RPG where it just like attacks, like each weapon does have a bit of a different mechanic to it. Like the whip is much longer, a lot easier to hit things, like, but certain things might have slashes, or you can throw it, or you can do all sorts of different things. So it's fun finding a new item, new gear, leveling up, trying different magic spells. So I think that's really enjoyable. Like I said, I think the puzzles are fine. They're a bit lacking in creativity and innovativeness. Is that innovation? Innovation? Yeah, that's better. There is like at least one puzzle that I think is just can be a showstopper for a casual playthrough, where like you could get to that point and just be so annoyed, and if you don't want to look up a fact, you might just never play the game again, and that's never good. You never want to have that, like, and I'll explain what it is. So if you don't want to get spoiled to this, you can mute it for 5 seconds. But there's a pretty generic overworld screen that you have to do a figure eight around two palm trees in, and the NPCs kind of communicate this to you, but it's like, I don't know if it's translation. I don't know what it is, but it took me a while, and I think I got it on accident, to be honest. I think I was just wandering around the thing and got it, and then somebody from my chat explained to me what, because I didn't even understand what happened. I finally unlocked the area, and it does give you hints as to like, oh, there's this thing you need to do, but like I don't know. I thought it was a bit strange. But yeah, overall, I think the gameplay is really good. It's a long game, which is really great for a Game Boy game. It took me 10.5 hours to beat casually. That's awesome for a Game Boy game. A lot of content, a lot of characters, a lot of different variety. So I think overall it does excel, even with some of those weaknesses.
For sure.
Yeah. So difficulty and fairness. I guess I'll speak to this because I have beaten the whole game casually. The game is really fair, I think, in terms of like you level up fairly naturally in the game. There's no need to stop and grind too often. It does benefit you to level up, but like since combat's fun enough, like since you're like doing action combat, not, random encounter turn-based combat, like you generally will end up killing enough things, especially if you're lost or trying to find something to get to a decent level. Like I think I got to level 52 in my casual play, and so like when I was at that level, like most of the bosses and stuff, everything scaled properly. Like with the speed run, obviously it's completely unbalanced in that regard. But I felt like it was fair outside of some of these like obtuse puzzles and such. I felt like it was fun and enjoyable. Some of the bosses are really tough. We'll talk about later. The last boss, the final boss is, I mean, especially in the speed run because you're so wildly underleveled, but the final boss is just really frustrating, and the first phase of it is incredibly unfair, like unquestionably. But for the most part, I think the game is fair, and it's difficult, like it's a challenge, but it's doable, and it doesn't tend to the frustrating side, I don't think. So even more than like Final Fantasy Legend or other of those, I think I found it to be fairly balanced. So
Yeah, my
and
my only
yeah.
criticism about difficulty and fairness is completely biased, and it's mostly just my own being bitter about it. But I feel like I've been coddled by a lot of games, especially slightly more modern games, where even if you're not saving frequently, there's sort of like a system where when you die, you go back only a certain distance,
Mhm.
not all the way back to your last save. And I definitely lost a lot of progress to this, and death can really sneak up on you in this game. It's very
Yeah.
easy to die very quickly when you find yourself in the thick of it. So I feel like the ability to lose a lot of progress makes me feel like it's unfair, but I'm aware that my bias is coming from my own mistakes that I make. So
Yeah, it could be really easy to like enter a room that like also like stuff can spawn in the doors or hit you like really hard. There's a lot of enemies that hit really hard. So you could definitely find yourself in a situation where if you didn't save, pretty consistently every time you were entering every few rooms or whatever, that you'd have to go backtrack a bit, and that can be frustrating.
that
But
being said, the
um
opposite side of that coin is that you can save constantly, even going
yeah.
as far as being able to save in the middle of a fight that you're in. So
Yeah, absolutely.
there's
You'll see in the speed run, like Bowie will be in a room that he would get one hit killed if he gets hit, and an axe is flying towards him, so he saves, reloads, and then everything's in a different place. So like you can literally save every tile of the game. So that is a nice touch. You don't have to go to a save point. You don't have to wait till certain things happen. So I think that's pretty cool as well, and makes it much more fair or easy, because if you save before any boss, you don't have to go backtrack, do a dungeon again to get to the boss. You can just start over and get better at it. So I think this game's pretty fun and replayable. It's not, I mean, for a Game Boy game and for the kind of game we normally talk about, it has a lot of depth. I mean, obviously it's an RPG, action RPG, so it has a lot of story, it has a lot of different dungeons, whatever. I will say that pretty typical of most Game Boy RPGs. There's not a lot of like side questing, similar to like Gargoyle's Quest, which you talked about. Like it's a fairly linear game. Oh, I'm gonna go fight this optional boss, or I'm gonna go, find some items that I might help me, but I don't need. Like for the most part, you're just going through the game as intended. So with that said, it's long enough and interesting enough that there's a variety of gameplay going on, that you would come back to it. Also, you can try and focus on different things. You could
Yeah, I was
focus
gonna
more on
say, I
magic or
feel
focus
like
more on
being able
attack. You
to
could,
do a completely different loadout would probably make for a very different experience. Focusing
yeah. I
on
mean, I don't.
power versus magic, I think, is the real trade-off.
I mean, different than other RPGs. It's not like, oh, I focus on magic and I'm gonna get a bunch of spells that I haven't gotten before, though. Like, it's still gonna be pretty much the same experience. From a speedrun perspective, that can make it more interesting, but from a casual perspective, where you're really leveling up to a proper level, anyways, I don't know how much of a difference it would make, but it is fun to also like try using different weapons primarily because the weapons do act fairly differently. Like an axe and a chain are very different from each other, and the swords are different. So yeah, there's enough replayability here, but again, fairly linear. But I don't think a lot of RPGs, even at this time outside of the Game Boy, had a lot of side questing and optional stuff like they do now. Now you expect I want hours and hours of content. Even starting with maybe Super Nintendo and definitely by PlayStation One, you're expecting all this additional optional content that you could find, and that just wasn't how these games worked then. So
Right.
miscellaneous content comments is, I mean, this game's gonna get a higher rating from me, and it's specifically because I'm relating it to other Game Boy games, and this is probably a top 10 Game Boy game, I would say. So it's a really good Game Boy game. There's not a lot of games like this on the Game Boy too. Like there are only a few games that would be classified as action RPGs, like this, Zelda, the Roland's Curse series, and that's about it that I can think of off the top of my head. It started the Mana series, which is also really impressive. So those are my miscellaneous comments, I
I
guess.
feel like my opinion of this game would be more nostalgia fueled if I had a history of playing Secret of Mana or something like that.
Sure.
So having not played that game, I feel like I don't really have any like nostalgia to draw on for this, but um, I don't think that makes it any worse of a game.
Sure. Do you want to give your rating?
Yeah, sure. Um, so I'm not really just going straight in on Game Boy specifically. I'm
Sure.
thinking about a lot of games in this sort of vein. I think that I'd probably give this game something like a 6. It's a strong game, but it's got some pretty noticeable flaws. I think that my opinion of it might change a lot if I progress beyond the first like 2 hours of the game.
Hmm.
But I think from what I saw, I think it is a solid game, one that I would probably recommend to someone if they were asking about it. But at the same time, I don't think that it's a strong enough game to earn a much higher score than that.
Okay. I give it an 8.5. I mean, that's what I gave it for the Game Boy Quest. So, I mean, maybe if I'm adjusting that for overall Game Boy stuff, I'd give it like a 7.5. But if I'm talking about all systems or whatever. But I mean, for the time, 1991, like, I mean, there's only been what, two Final Fantasy games out at this time. Only a few Zelda games. I think it's a really cool experience. I think there's a lot to it. I enjoyed casually playing it. I think if you did play all 10, 11 hours of the game, you might feel differently. Um, because it's just like, I'm just the amount of content that's there, and
Sure,
some
and it
of
definitely
the
builds.
dungeons, and yeah, I enjoyed it quite a bit. I enjoy games, especially like older games like this, where like it has RPG elements to it, but it's not a full out RPG. So like, like Simon's Quest or other stuff where I can do action based gameplay, but I can actually still level up and put my experience towards things. I'm a big sucker for that mechanic. So I really like this game. I think it's a gem. If I were to do my top 10 list of Game Boy games, I'm sure it would be close to that, if not there. So I really like this game quite a bit.
Yeah, I think the fact that it's an action RPG versus just a standard turn-based RPG definitely is to its favor. I think I could actually see going a little higher than a 6, but in general, I think that it's a pretty. I mean, this is, I guess, not early era Game Boy. This is
That's pretty. 89 was the first year for the Game Boy, so it went
91. I guess isn't super late through it, but
all the way through 97, 98. So
well, when I play through it, because I can foresee myself wanting to play through this eventually. When I play through it, I'll update everyone on whether or not my opinion has changed.
absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's a long game to play, so I completely understand that. So let's go ahead. We'll take a quick break, and then we can talk a bit about the speed run.
So we're talking a little bit about the speedrun for Final Fantasy Adventure. To start off with, we usually like to break down the way the categories work, and this is one of those interesting games where despite the fact that the text for the Japanese version is technically faster, and there's a few reasons why you might want to play on the Japanese version, the primarily run category for this game is English, and when asked about it, it seems pretty obvious that the answer is that the Japanese version, there's obvious challenges if you're a Western speedrunner, if you're playing this game and you're relying on such a text-heavy game. Now, that's not to say that a lot of speedruns haven't, made the decision to focus on speed and play it on Japanese anyway, but it seems like this game has made the choice, their community has made the choice to mostly focus on English. So for the majority of these times, we're talking about in English. So the world record for any percent, which is a glitch category, it skips a lot of the content in the game. The world record is 32 minutes and 33 seconds by Bowie, Bowie Alexander, or Bowie the Hero. He has the world record, and he actually took that world record from Opus, who I mentioned earlier. Opus had a 33:06, so that's an improvement of what, 40 something seconds.
And what's interesting is when Bowie got his PB, it was over a 2-minute PB. So that explains how volatile this speedrun is.
Yeah,
like PB by 2 minutes to get world record by 43 seconds. This isn't
watching through that run.
It was optimized every room. Like this is and I'm looking forward to telling more because it's a very interesting speedrun. But yeah, it's crazy. He just did that like a month ago, and it was I don't think he was expecting to beat the world record by 45 seconds or whatever. So
no, it's actually interesting if you look at his run, because you can see specifically where his time losses were. Looking at his run, he went from being ahead by like 16 seconds to being ahead by like 2 minutes in one split. I think it was specifically the snowman glitch split. I guess that must have gone rough for him in a previous run, something like that.
There's a lot of RNG, so yeah,
for sure. So that was a 33-second improvement over Opus, and Opus had actually taken the world record, I think, previously from El Magus, who had a 33:55. So this record has changed hands. There's actually more people if you go back further, but this is sort of the recent history of this category. Bowie himself, his world record was a 2-minute improvement over his own PB, so it was a big gap there that he improved by. There's also the warpless category, which is the glitchless version of this game. Bowie Alexander actually has a 1 hour 57.
Well, there are glitches. I would correct you on that. There are some glitches still in the game, but
it doesn't use
there's no warping.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of like NMG, where it's like you're not making giant skips, but you still do the helm glitch. You still do some other minor.
So he has a 1 hour 57 minute and 18 second 1 hour 57 minute and 18 second time, and he's actually the only person to ever sub 2, according to everything I could find. Zorlak 7 actually has a 2 hour 1 minute and 4 second. His is the next time down on the leaderboard. And one of the older runs, actually, if you look at the video of it, it's pretty close to being sub 2, but it was played on Super Game Boy 1. And so with the time conversion, it's actually like a 2 hour and 3 minute time, so it's not quite as close. Now, there are Japanese categories. So Bowie has run the Japanese categories of both any percent and warpless. And he has a 34:11, which is a difference of almost 2 minutes in any percent. And he has a 2 hour and 1 minute and 43 second run in warpless, which is about a 4 minute time difference.
Which those are slower times, but the text is faster. So I think it's just not as much time has been focused on those categories.
Not the same level of optimization. I think the warpless category actually has another runner, an actual Japanese runner, which I would have to guess was probably his motivation for running the Japanese version as well, to compare to another Japanese runner. Since you can't really compare exactly the same, as well as the fact that the Japanese version uses JRTA timing. If you guys aren't familiar, we've talked about this in the past before, but different communities use different timing methods. The standard methods that you'll typically find are referred to as the SRL method, which is a method that favors racing. It's usually time from your last input in the menus, so time to get the game started, all the way to the last point that matters in the game. So for instance, for something like Super Mario World, SRL would be from selecting 1 player, 2 player till the last hit on Bowser. Whereas the difference between that and what's referred to as SDA timing, or sometimes just RTA timing, is first control to last control. So the first time you get an opportunity to control your character in the game to the last moment you get a chance to control your character in the game. But that differs from JRTA timing, which typically adds in both the time from power on, which is kind of a controversial addition to timing methods. Timing from power on sometimes doesn't allow you the same opportunities to manipulate RNG by sitting on the title screen for some amount of time, for instance, or any sort of menuing you need to do. So if you need to go into the menu to change some setting, that's all part of your time. And then in addition, also JRTA timing tends to add in the credits, which is sometimes controversial, having to sit through the credits all the way to the very end of the credits to find out where
Especially
your time
for
is.
games like SMRPG where the credits are like 6 minutes long. I mean, it's it's a whole different, you're
Right.
adding 6 minutes to your time that you're not doing anything at the end. So it's kind of
Exactly.
funny.
Right.
So also there's a task for this, and I kind of want to dive into some of the heavy mechanics of this game, but the task is actually only a 1741. So you'll notice that's like 15 minutes faster than the any percent time done RTA. The task run is essentially a completely different speed run than the any percent. There's like 3 to 4 different out of bounds tricks that any percent does not do, and essentially just is completely under leveled, does like nothing, and just it would be almost impossible. It would be completely impossible to do what the task does. You would be able to maybe take the warps that they do, but grind and level up at a certain point. But no human being could fight the final boss, at the level that they're at, or do the things they do anywhere close. So it's really interesting to watch as somebody who runs any percent to see just how wildly different the second half of the run is and the tasks. Also, this game was run at SGDQ 2016 by Opus, and Opus actually has a tutorial, the one that I learned on YouTube. So if you're interested in learning any percent, he does have a fairly brief tutorial. It's like an hour long, hour and a half long, I think, and walks you through how to do all the different tricks and setups and stuff. So it's always really cool when games have stuff like this. If you go and look at the leaderboards, actually, it's kind of sad. There's only like 8, 9 submissions for any percent, so it's not a heavily run game. So I would love to motivate at least one person listening to this to give the run a try, because it's a lot of fun.
For sure.
So I guess let me go ahead and dive into what the heck it is. So I'm going to focus on any percent first. I haven't done a warpless run. I've watched it, and I can explain some of the differences, but a lot of the tricks and the things we want to talk about are going to be in the any percent run. But for both of them, the first key thing you do is called the helm glitch. So what this is you start off the game, as soon as you get chased away by Julius and fall on the ground, you start grinding money. You want to get 140 gold, and you'll notice that there's these certain cat-like creatures that drop 3 gold apiece, and then the mushrooms drop 1, and you'll be rotating through a couple of different rooms. So the way you do a lot of the grinding, or a lot of, like, whether it be for a specific item or for experience in this game, is that you leave one enemy left on the screen. If you leave one enemy alive on the screen when you leave, when you come back, the room will respawn. If you completely clear the room, then the room will stay completely cleared. So you don't want to do that. So you can keep rotating through the same number of rooms as long as you leave one enemy alive. So, but what happens with the helm glitch is you get this 140 to buy an iron helmet. It's the first shop that you find. It's the only thing that you buy in the entire any percent speedrun. And then you take the iron helmet and you move it to the second slot of your inventory. So normally it would be in the first, but now it's in the second. You save and quit, and quick relaunch the game, and then when you go ahead and equip the helm, so you should only have like +2 defense, or no, +3 defense to what you have or something. It's like so you'd have like 7 defense, but it takes you like all the way up to like 17 defense. It actually buffers it all the way up to like +11. It's the whole reason why you are able to do this run, because a lot of this run is predicated on, obviously, we're going to beat the game at a much lower level than you're intended. And so to kind of counteract the defensive issue, this is something the task doesn't do, of course, because the task can decide I'm not going to get hit by anything ever. But for an actual playthrough, this is essentially necessary. And so the reason this works, I was talking to Bowie. So shout outs to twitch.tv/Bowie the Hero. Go give him a follow. We really wanted to have him on because he's like the the guy for this game, but he took a bunch of time out of his schedule to like talk to me about a bunch of the different things and stuff like that. He's in Europe, so like the time didn't work out, but he was hugely helpful in this. And what he says is that from the bottom up, the slots are labeled 1 through 12, so you have 12 inventory slots. 12 is the first slot you see, and 11 is the one to the right. So counting down. And with an empty slot at the start of the menu, the game is reading basically that it's the end of the equipment list. So it gets confused. And then since we have equipment in other slots, it overwrites the defensive properties of the helmet with the number of assigned to the slot, which is 11. And so basically it gives you defense plus 11 instead of plus 3, which is a huge difference in this game. I mean, a completely different, huge
Especially
difference.
at this level where you have pretty
Yeah.
much no base defense of your own, so buffing up to 11 on the helm is big.
Yeah, for perspective, I think the warpless run doesn't get anything higher defensively until like 45 minutes into the game, something like that, about halfway through the run. So this is like a big upgrade. The reason you can't do this with any other items later on or whatever is that it always will put it to 11. So later on, when you have better defensive stuff, it would literally buff it down to 11. So if you had something that was plus 15, it put it to 11. So it's only useful in the early game, but it's still basically a predicate of the first thing to do in the game, and it makes all the difference.
For sure.
And so then for the any percent run, you're basically going to be casually playing through the game as you casual playthrough. You're gonna fight two bosses, and the girl's gonna get kidnapped, and then you're gonna go rescue her. She gets kidnapped like 8 times in the game. I don't understand, but um, about 20 minutes in the game, that's where you hit the warps, and I think that's the really cool and interesting part of this speed run, of course, because basically you go from 20 minutes into the game to the end of the game in like 10 minutes through doing 3 different warps. And what's cool about these warps too is that they're very, at least 2 of them are like basically completely free and accessible. You could learn them right now and do it and pull it off within a few minutes, and it's really cool to see. So the first one is from the marsh to the snowfield. So basically, after you kill Lee the vampire, you leave. You have this item called the sickle. The sickle lets you cut down like shrubbery on the overworld map and stuff, which lets you access new areas that you couldn't access before and stuff as well. What you do is you on a specific screen, you slash 2 shrubs and then stand where they were, move one screen over to the right. Now you're inside of the shrubs in that room. uh, Tap up so you're facing up and slash again, and then when you move back left, all of a sudden you're not back to the screen that you were on initially. You are 2/3 of the way through the game now. You are in the snowfield, which is you know in the warpless run is like 50, no, it's like over an hour into the game, actually, I believe. So you just skipped more than half the game.
Yeah, I
And
remember
the
when I
reason
was
this
at I remember when I was at SGDQ 2016, where Opus ran this game. He was practicing in the practice room and trying to talk me into running it, and he basically handed me the controller and told me like what inputs I needed to do. So he just said,
Mhm.
"Press this, go here, do this," and first try, no effort at all, I managed to do the warp
Yeah,
that takes you all the way to the snowfield because
this is a
there's
free
literally
trick.
nothing
There's
to
literally
it.
no way to mess it up. I mean, it's like you just walk and slash
You
somewhere and
could
then walk
watch
back.
someone do it and probably recreate it just fine.
Absolutely. So it's really cool, and it basically what happens is it zips you to the first Y coordinate it can find, but lets you stay on the same X coordinate, is what Bowie says. And the whole way this game, I'm not going to dive deep into the weeds. I'm not going to pretend I understand it, but if you're familiar with the Legend of Zelda on the NES, you know that like the way that the levels and the overworld are stored in the memory is not the same as where they represent themselves in the game as you play it. So, for example, in the Zelda games, all of the dungeons for Zelda 1 are in one giant block. They actually piece together like a Tetris puzzle to make one block. That's similar to this game, is that, whether it be here or there, on the overworld, when you're actually playing it, in the memory of the game, it's in a different place. And so that's really cool. And then essentially, not to make this like a tutorial, but it makes sense mostly just to explain it as it comes, is from this point on, the rest of the game, everything is one hit kill. You die if you touch any enemy for the rest of the run until the final boss,
It's
basically.
because of how
So
massively underleveled you are. I mean,
yes, so
you're basically entering that point at level nothing.
you're level 6 or 7, and you'd probably normally be level 30 something at this point in the game casually, or maybe a little higher. I don't know. So it's every enemy, the little snowmen, the little cute snowmen that just slide around on the ground. If they bump into you, you're dead. The next trick, basically, a lot of this game is very RNG heavy. That's the other frustrating thing that I'll get into. In the I guess I missed this before, but there's a specific drop or two that you need on the way to just playing this game casually up to the point where you get to the warps. You need a matic drop and you need a key drop if you don't go buy a key. And so those again are random. You have to kill. It is nice this game. Like the one enemy, like if you fight a crab or whatever, like the crab, if it drops an item, it's always the same item. So you don't have to like it's not like the Zelda thing where maybe it drops a bomb this time, a rupee next time. Like if you need a matic, you kill the same enemy every time you see it, and eventually you get one. But you if you get to a certain point of going through the rooms and you still haven't gotten that item, you either have to reset or you have to keep reloading that room until you get that item.
So,
And so
like, the
that's a
key
big
drop's
reset
not
point.
random. Watching it, it seemed like the key drop was random. I mean, obviously, whether or not you
The
get a
key drop
chest,
is random.
but it's tied to
Yeah,
a specific enemy.
yeah. So if you kill a skeleton and it drops a chest, it's always a key.
Okay, that's really
The fact
interesting.
is you need it. Yeah, so that's nice. I should have mentioned that before. Sorry, this is a little
No, you're good.
scatterbrain, but yeah, when you're on the way to getting up to this point where you're going to be warping, there are two big drops you need. You need one set of keys and you need one set of matics. The matics let you break down the walls or whatever, and so that can be you can lose like 20 seconds and just go buy a key, but again, on the top level, you're not going to do that, so you're depending on wanting to get that drop. And obviously, the sooner at no point in this run until the end do you need to grind for experience. So killing extra enemies isn't benefiting you really in any way. Like, so the earliest room you get a thing, the more you can just focus on getting through the room as fast as possible without stopping to kill things. So that's a big part of the run early on. And then that comes up again here. So you warp to this snowfield, everything's one hit kill. And basically, right before the warp, you get a spell called Slep, which is like sleep, but there's only one E, which is really nice. I like Slep.
It's
And
efficient.
so what Slep lets you do is it puts all the enemies on the screen to sleep for a certain period of time. The higher your will meter is filled up, the longer they'll stay asleep. And this spell is really important because for us to grind to kill anything at this level or try and get any items, we want to put it to sleep because again, if any enemy touches us, we die instantly. So at this point, you are using Slep and trying to kill these walruses that will drop an item called Blizzard 2. So this is again RNG. You could get it on the first one you kill. You could keep having to reload a room for 2, 3, 4 minutes, and so that's a big difference in the time. But the Blizzard is going to set up the third skip, so you need to get that, and then you go right into the next two skips, and you're at the end of the game. Which is really cool. So one of these skips I find to be fairly difficult, and one is again really free. So the first one is the sword warp. Did you get to see this in the run? It looks really
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, I
I
watched
think
both of them. This one I think has to be the more difficult one.
absolutely.
This one seems really tough to like get to work out because you're doing it in a room filled with ice, which if you're not familiar, ice in this game works very differently than it does in a lot of games. For a lot of
It
games,
pushes you to a
ice
specific point.
yeah, in most games, ice just makes it so you have a harder time controlling yourself, sort of on a tile-based grid. But in this game, it specifically has a direction in mind, and that's the way it
Yeah.
pushes you. So doing anything around ice seems like it'd be very challenging.
Yeah, so you enter a cave shortly after fighting the walruses, getting the blizzard, and you find you're in this ice cave, and there's a specific room with a bunch of ice tiles around kind of a big block, and there's a bunch of enemies in the room. Again, any enemy will kill you in one hit, so you have to reload the room in such a way, like go back in, leave, come back in, whatever, to make it so that you can get through the room without touching something. Because if an enemy touches you, you die. You want to get to the top of the room, and then you equip the sword. The sword has a specific mechanic. Like I said, all the weapons have different mechanics if your will meter is completely full. The sword launches the player like across the room, like as like a Super Saiyan Superman with his sword out, like slashing across the room. And so what you do is you stand right next to an ice tile and you tap left to move your character to start sliding directly down, because that's where that specific ice tile wants to move you. Like Chad said, they want to move you in a specific direction, so it moves you straight down. And then you time hitting that full will attack with the sword to launch your character across the screen. And what happens is basically it doesn't know what to do with you in the pixel space that you're in. The way that just gonna exactly quote how Bowie said this, because I have no idea how to articulate this, but he says you're breaking out of the half tile movement that Chad was talking about earlier. Each tile in the game is made up of 4 quadrants, and you move on each of those. However, you don't just port to each half tile when you move. The frames of movement are locked when you do it normally. However, with ice, you're auto moving in the direction the ice sends you, like we said, like they're conveyor belts, not slides. You're doing a perpendicular flying sword on a pixel that is within the quadrant you're standing on by breaking out of the usual quadrant pixels. You move your collision detection, plus the game auto runs you the direction you end up facing. So that's a lot of words. What that means is you do this slash, the game doesn't know what to do with you, and so it automatically just makes you walk all the way to the right of the screen, out of bounds. And so now you are clipped into the wall. And this trick is difficult on 2 levels. One, you have to set the room in such a way that none of the enemies will be on the top half of the screen, because even if you pull off the trick, if your character as your character automatically walks to the right of the screen, if it touches an enemy, you still die. So you need them to be loaded low on the screen and not moving towards you, hopefully. And then you need to time this. Bowie estimated he thought maybe within 3 frames, but he said he's never broken it down or whatever. But it's a pretty tight window. Once you start getting the timing down, it's not too bad. But it's one of those tricks where like you're always trying to do it faster than you should, similar to like spin speed and Link to the Past. Like it's really easy to try and go too fast. The timing is really kind of specific. So what's really cool is it clicks. You should look up this trick. It's really cool, and it clips you into the wall. You move your way out of the wall to the right, and now you're in this developer cave thing. Like this is not a part of the game that you actually play casually. These are caverns that the developer put in there for whatever need that they have for whatever they did. And so you travel through them in a specific order, and then you end up at the end of the cave going into the underground volcano. So you just skipped a whole bunch of
So
stuff
wait,
as
it
well.
warps you to a debug area?
Basically, yeah, you're in like this series of caves that have no enemies in them. It's just entrance north, south, east, west, and you navigate them specifically, and you end up where you need to be.
Interesting.
So
I
yeah, I
didn't realize
don't
that was the
know.
case when I was watching it.
Yeah, that's why there's nothing interesting in like 6 straight rooms. It's just doors on all ends. So it's really cool. And then lastly, you end up in this underground volcano, I think is what it's called. And you do the snowman warp. So this is the third and final warp. This one, so the whole reason you grinded getting the blizzard attack is the blizzard lets you do a temporary ice spell. You don't get in the normal game, if you casually play through it, you get a spell that lets you do this. And there are a lot of puzzles, like we said, built around this mechanic of turning something into a snowman and putting it on a tile or moving it somewhere. But the blizzard drop that you get lets you get 2 free spells. Basically, you're not using any magic points, and so since you don't have this spell, you need it to do this trick. You freeze an enemy and push it down a staircase, and then you just hold down on top of the enemy. And what happens is, so at this point in the run, you still have the girl with you, and she will start walking and overlapping your sprite, and that will slowly push your sprite down pixel by pixel as she overlaps with your sprite. Um, the way that Bowie explained this to me is the bottom of every single room in the game is like a warp trigger. Even though it's not actually warping you like we're talking about, you'll see the screen will shrink down and then open up as you go into a new room. And so, like, there's a specific trigger for that kind of warp animation. And what you're doing is you're push you down below that warp trigger without triggering it, and then you're able to push the snowman out of the way, and then you warp all the way to the end of the game. Now you're in Mana Holy Land, and you skip the game, and it's cool. The reason that works your helper NPCs act just like enemies, so they can walk through things. So she can walk straight through you, which would obviously, if they couldn't walk through you, that'd be a real pain if you had an NPC that you kept bumping into. But it essentially pushes you down past that warp trigger, and the way the actual game is laid out, memory wise, it takes you to this other room, even though it's not actually the room below you. In the memory, it is. So it just like kind of works out really perfectly the whole way these warps work. I'm certain there's warps that you could do throughout the game. I don't. I mean, they wouldn't take you to places for you to do the game faster, like speedrunning wise. But I think a lot of these are reproducible in different locations as well.
Sure.
Like the task does several of these different sword warps. It does like four very difficult sword warps and goes through a whole different path to get to the end of the game. So it's really cool. Two of them, like I said, are really free, and so basically all of those words to say, like, after you kill Lee the vampire, like you skip 2/3, 3/4 of the game after doing these three tricks, and now you are literally in near the tree of mana going in to fight Julius at the end of the game. Um, and then at this point, this is where you grind. This is where you grind. You fight these elephants. The elephants have the highest experience of any enemy in the game, and you kill them. And you're like level 7 at this point. You're able to level up to level. Well, Bowie goes to level 17 because he's crazy. But level 19, if you want to be safe, for 21, 23, you can do that in like 3 minutes or something.
Right.
You almost every elephant you kill, you get leveled up. Like, so it's a really quick, efficient way, and that's why you don't need a level anywhere else in the game. They also drop a shield called the Aegis shield, which will let you deflect nuke attacks, which are like fireballs, and that's really important for the final boss. So that's kind of the whole speed run outside of some of the other notable things. The bosses are obviously really important. The Julius fights are probably the hardest boss fights I've ever had in a video game in my life. Especially doing them under leveled. Bowie fighting Julius 1 at level 17 is just unfathomable to me. The way he works is it's three clones of the same enemy. You're on like a checkerboard, and they are moving randomly. Again, at Bowie's level, like if one of them touches you, you're dead. If a nuke hits you, you're basically dead. They're shooting fireballs at you randomly, and then they also teleport randomly. So if they teleport and appear on top of you, you die instantly. And so the only way to efficiently kill this phase is to charge up your will meter all the way, and then do that flying attack across them and try and clip them. But again, there's no specific pattern, there's no way to manipulate it. There's unwinnable patterns, Bowie says. Like, there's stuff that can happen that can trap you and you're just screwed. You can go and do your sword attack, and he'll teleport away, and he was there and you would have hit him, but then he doesn't, and you need to land like 3 or 4 of these attacks per one of the Julius clones. So it's a very difficult fight. Honestly,
What
one
is
of the
the
hardest things I've ever done.
what does the Aegis shield do for this fight?
So the Aegis shield lets you block his fireball. So if you are facing the right way and the fireball hits the front of you, it will block the fireball.
Okay.
Now if it hits you, like it's the hitbox is a bit weird. So if it hits you even like a little bit above or below, on the or especially on the side or the back, then you get hit. But it does give you this added level of protection. Like Bowie didn't get the drop for it in his PB, so he just went in and did the fight at level 17 without it, which is crazy to me. I don't understand, but
Yeah.
that fight is just, generally you save at the beginning of that fight, and then you can keep reloading it at least. The other thing that makes it possible to do this is as a result of all of these glitches that we've done, Fuji is still with you up until the end of the game. She's supposed to have been kidnapped, whatever, and so you can keep asking her to heal you. So it's a really nice mechanic. Is like you're fighting a boss. Your cure spell doesn't really do very much, and you also have almost no magic points because you've invested none of your level ups in magic, right? So you can cast like 3 cure spells, and they only do 20 hit points, which isn't going to help you, but she'll keep healing you, so you can keep asking her to heal you. So it's a really nice part of the glitch, is that you get to keep her with you. And then you fight 2 more phases of Julius. I guess they all have their different challenges. They're a little bit more scripted, and a lot easier to maintain. But I mean, it's so difficult that when you're at this level, like if you kill the final, I've had this happen. You kill the final boss and you're standing too close to him, he explodes and you die anyways. So like
Oh, that's
everything
rough.
is very precise. Movement, like again, anytime you get hit once, you're basically dead at this point,
The
unless you grind
second
it up to
Julius
like level
fight
24,
reminded me a
20.
lot of watching people fight Gleeok in Zelda 1.
Mm-hmm.
It's very positional, it's very like
Yeah.
understanding exactly where he stops and putting
Yeah,
yourself in the right
it's not a
lineup.
scripted, yeah, it's not a scripted fight at all, but you can see what movement he's doing. There's two safe spots essentially on the board that you can go to. So like you can play it more aggressively and risk getting hit, which I think like when you're at Bowie's level you do, but if you understand the fight and you know his movements and you know the safe spots, then you know what times you can hit him and what times you can kind of go hide. And so it's kind of a bit of a dance that you learn. Like I've gotten a lot better at that fight. And the last fight is scripted as well, although he teleports to like 9 or 10 different positions. So you have to memorize where he is each position. And he takes up like half the screen. So again, if you touch his hand or get hit by a nuke, like you have to reload your save. So the Julius is the big reason why this run isn't more optimized because even if you grind for the best RNG, which is again, if you get say you get an early you know, Matic drop, well then you might take an extra minute to get Blizzard too, and now you lost that RNG. Like it's basically not
Sure.
going to happen. That it's going to be perfect anyways. But
Yeah, because you need a key,
um,
you need a Matic, you need Blizzard, you want
yeah.
the Aegis Shield. So
Also in the I didn't point this out before, but for the Julius fight, there is a period of time going through the dungeon section that you want to get. You fight these owls that are really adorable. It feels so terrible killing them. They drop something called a crystal, and the crystal will automatically refill your whole will meter. So
oh,
those are really useful. So you want to get as many of those as you can at that point in the run, because then when you are on the first phase of Julius, you can use as many of those as you can to automatically have your will meter filled up and do that attack. Because the tough part of that fight is waiting for your will meter to fill up while you walk around. You can't slash at him because if you slash, you empty your will meter. So you can't slash at him, you can't do whatever. You just have to walk around hoping to not get hit. So
right.
it's really intense. The end of the run is very tense, especially Julius one. It's quite a bit of fun. And there's a lot of different like smaller tech. I mean, like when you get to Bowie's level, there's stuff like iframe canceling and attack canceling. Um, a big part of the run is resetting the rooms, saving and quitting. You'll notice, for example, in the warpless run, Bowie will have to save in the middle of rooms often, just to like because an enemy's blocking his path, reload and hope the enemy's not blocking his path again. Sometimes he'll have to resave 3, 4 times in a row to get the room to let him through because again you're such a low level that any enemy that you encounter for like the entire game on warpless, which is the entire last hour and a half, like you can't handle more than like one hit from. So it's quite an intense tech heavy game. I speaking of warpless, I guess we've been I don't want to go into too much like it's a tutorial or anything, but it is really long and execution heavy, and you're very underleveled for the whole run. But there are two different routes that people have done, which is really interesting to me. So Bowie, who has the world record, uh, powers up his attack quite a bit. So he focuses on attack and then on his health and whatever else he needs. But I Crowley, Crow, he does a magic build, so he does a completely different strategy. And so that the magic build, like we said, if your will meter is all the way full, you do 4 times damage, and that's great. So you can kill bosses quicker, you can do a lot of different things that you can't do with attack, but you're also doing a considerable amount more of menuing, and menuing's fairly slow in the game. So it actually balances out to being a bit slower, but it's still like a preference thing. So it's interesting that there could be two completely different build approaches. But a lot of the game also is knowing what you're going to level when, and knowing when you're going to level up because it refills your health, it refills your MP, it refills all the things that you need. So that's a pretty decent overview. I mean, do you have any questions as somebody who's a bit newer to seeing the run or anything that you would be interested in hearing?
No, I mean, I think it's kind of interesting how many parts of it actually end up being optional. You know, the fact that you can make it through this game and skip as much as you do. I'm surprised that more of that doesn't really slow you down. The
Mm-hmm.
fact that you can even beat Julius as underleveled as you are, the fact that, you know, finding an item that provides you the blizzard spell even though you never actually found the blizzard spell, like
Yeah.
it all just seems to come together at the end, which is really amazing to me.
Yeah. And the warps really route you to like the proper places. Like it seems like it was almost designed that way. Like it's just so lucky that like, oh, it jumps you off right here, and then that's where the blizzard like skip is. Like it's literally the next room is the next skip. So I mean, whoever routed it like found a really awesome route, which is it's pretty cool. I think the warps are really fun to pull off, but I think the reason you can do something like this that you can't do in a standard RPG usually is that it is action based. And so when it's action based, if you execute properly, you can do, you know, something at a much lower level than you should, which is really cool. You know, if you're in Final Fantasy 1 and you're level whatever and you go fight someone, you hit attack and you do X amount of, you know, it rolls the damage that you're going to do. But if you're actually controlling the character, you can avoid, you can, you know, get inside the hitbox and get a bunch of hits in. And so, I mean, you'll notice Bowie. I mean, there's so many different parts of the run and more complex aspects to it. There's things that are definitely left out. Like he fights a bunch of bosses in Warpless that are very difficult. They're very precise. He has a specific amount of cure spells and healing spells. He knows exactly how many hit points he'll have, for example, so that the hardest attack a boss can do will take him down to 1 HP and then he can heal. So like it's a very precise technical route. But going into every detail of what would make a run interesting would just kind of take too long. But it's a really cool game that I don't know why more people don't run, because it's you know, it is really well regarded. I think a lot of people did grow up with this game, but the speed run has gotten, you know, a lot less attention than you'd think.
Yeah, so if you're looking to get into this speed run, you know, typically we just have to refer you to, you know, whatever the world record is and do your best with it. But this game actually does have a pretty good any percent tutorial, at least if that's the category you're interested in. You said you learned off of Opus's tutorial, right?
Yep. Yeah, it's not like a overly long tutorial. Like some people make like a 5-hour tutorial for like a 20-minute game and you're just like, I don't have time for this. But it was a fairly digestible thing where you could learn it in, you know, 2 streams or whatever, and have a good time with it. So this is definitely not the kind of game that you like pick up and get a good PB within like a week though. I've realized that, unfortunately. Like I have a 43-minute time, which is like 11 minutes off world record. But it takes a lot of adjusting to it's a very frustrating speed game, I'll say that, because every room you're moving in, you're getting pinballed around, you're trying to get a certain drop, you have no clue where enemies are. A lot of enemies are one hit killing you, or they're blocking this door, you can't see their iframes, or they activate your iframes and now you can't go up the stairs because your iframes are flashing. It's just a lot of craziness. So it can be really frustrating, but it is a really satisfying run at the same time, because it has these really cool tricks and it is really difficult to execute. And so you get a sense of accomplishment for beating like Julius, for example. It's a huge accomplishment to beat Julius at any level below 30 or whatever, you know. So
For sure.
but yeah, I definitely recommend it. Definitely follow Bowie the Hero, follow Opus. These are really great speedrunners. iCrowley, and maybe consider going through the tutorial, seeing if it's the kind of game for you. To at least just put up a run, see, and you know, get to experience doing the warps and the different tricks and all.
Maybe we'll try to tweet out a link to the tutorial for this game when the
Yeah.
episode releases. So.
Yeah, we'll have to do that. So definite strong recommend. And so with that is the speed run. That's the best I could do. I'm sorry, Bowie, if you're listening. I know there's probably so many things that your heart wishes I said, but go follow these people and they'll tell you all the answers. They'll answer all your questions about what's going on. But we'll go ahead and take a quick break and we'll answer some of your live Q&A.
All right, so we were just going to answer a few of your questions. A few of you have been kind enough to give us a few questions, and so we're going to talk about it right now. Case asks in chat, how does this gameplay compare to FFA 2? So, John?
So okay, so one thing, I mean, there is no FFA 2, but what's interesting is when they were first prequeling Secret of Mana coming out in Nintendo Power, they do have like one of those block things that says coming soon or whatever, Final Fantasy Adventure 2, and has screenshots of Secret of Mana and stuff. So it was at some point going to be called Final Fantasy Adventure 2. That's kind of interesting. I came across that when I was researching.
I wonder if he was
Neither of us
confusing with Final Fantasy Legend 2, since that's a saga game, so it's turn-based.
Well, there's also two remakes of this game, so it's like it could be all kinds of things because there's a Game Boy remake and then like
That's
a
true.
PSP remake,
And it could just be
a
a cute reference to the fact that Final Fantasy Adventure 2 would be more or less Secret of Mana.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to say that this is asking Secret of Mana, and the things that I'll say about that, as two people who have never played Secret of Mana, is that, like I said, you do have that wheel system in Secret of Mana, so you have this wheel menu that you cycle through to choose different attacks, and then you also do position multiple different characters in different positions to use attacks. If you watch a speed run of this game, there's 1 player 2 controller runs of it, so you're controlling 2 different players on the screen at the same time as one person, which always blows my mind. But there's definitely a deeper combat system because you have multiple players you're controlling. Even when you have an assisting character in Final Fantasy Adventure, the character is automatically doing whatever. So it's like he's just randomly following around with you, shooting fireballs. You don't get to tell him when to shoot fireballs. You don't know what he's going to do. So it's definitely got a little bit more depth there. I think it also does have more magic and attacks and just a whole deeper system. But it's definitely the next step forward and kind of defines what the Mana series is like, which is not really like Zelda. It's like there's more RPG aspect to it.
So Andy J Retro asks, how do I Final Fantasy? As in, where do you recommend that I start? So I think that this is an interesting...
Are we talking casually or as a speedrunner? Because that's two completely different questions.
I have to imagine that we're talking casually, like if I've never gotten into a Final Fantasy game. And both fortunately and unfortunately, none of the Final Fantasy games build on each other. They're all completely unique stories, which I think is personally a great thing. There's no reason I can't play Final Fantasy 7 if I haven't played all of the Final Fantasy games that came out before it.
Unless they're sequel. I mean, there are a few sequels. Obviously, there's like 13.1, 13.2, or whatever.
But those are numbered specifically to indicate that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But I
Um,
think the other side of that is that anyone you ask this question to is just going to list off their favorite Final Fantasy games.
exactly. I think I would say, I mean, I'm not a huge Final Fantasy fan. I've realized, like, I always thought I was, but I just love Final Fantasy VII. I've never really gotten into any other ones. I would say, I mean, it depends on the type of game you like, for sure. Like, there's a difference between 8-bit, 16-bit, and whatever RPGs. I would say, if you're one of those people that's like, I want to start with Final Fantasy One and go all the way through, instead of playing the NES version, I'd play like the PSP version or whatever, because they fix a lot of things that make that game miserable.
Yeah,
And
Super
that's
Famicom
not an
had a 1 and
insult.
2 release as well, right?
Yeah, I think so. And it makes a I don't know if those change a lot of the issues people have, but like for example, like if you want to buy 99 potions, you have to individually go through the menu and buy one potion at a time. There's a lot of grinding in that game. There's a lot of stuff that apparently they fixed. I'd say Final Fantasy 6 is probably the highest regarded of them all, which is Final Fantasy 3 in the US. A lot of people love that. I have to casually play that on stream like starting next week, so I only played it a little bit, but yeah, I mean, it's kind of like what season of American Horror Story should I start with? Like you said, they're completely not connected. They're whole brand new stories, whole brand new experiences. So you can kind of start wherever you want, which is kind of cool.
That
In
reference had
terms
a
of
narrow
speedrunning, good
strike
luck.
range, man.
Pick Yeah, but in terms of speedrunning, make sure you're in love with whatever Final Fantasy game you're deciding to speedrun, because boy howdy, it's a lot of work. I know
Yeah.
Final Fantasy VII has tested my limits for, is this my favorite game and do I actually love it? Because it's long speed runs like that are brutal, and every Final Fantasy speed run is fairly lengthy. So
I think Final Fantasy 1 obviously is the grandfather. I think Final Fantasy 5 is my personal favorite. The job system was really unique to me, though I've heard just as many people complain that they found the job system really tedious to them. Final Fantasy 6 is probably the most popular of the
mhm.
16-bit and previous, so the retro Final Fantasy games. Final Fantasy 6 is probably the favorite among them all. Final Fantasy VII is a hugely popular one, probably through the nostalgia goggles in a lot of ways.
Mhm. I
Um,
love that game, but I understand that people come to it that didn't play it when it was 1997 and they don't feel the same way. So there's like, you find people on the internet that either love that game or hate that game.
yeah,
So
as
it's
I'm
kind
getting
of a
older, I'm
polarizing
starting to
topic.
realize that those games that represented the huge transition in the fundamentals, so huge
Mhm.
transition from 2D to 3D Zelda would be, or sorry, 2D to 3D Super Mario would be Super Mario 64, and so that game gets a lot of praise that maybe it doesn't deserve quite as much as it gets. And then you've got like Ocarina of Time, which represents that game's transition into 3D, probably doesn't deserve quite as
Because
much
it's the
praise as
first
it
experience
gets.
people had with certain things
Right.
that were like mind blowing at the time.
Right. And so I think likewise Final Fantasy VII represents that first transition to 3D, and at the time it was groundbreaking. It really felt like it was able to properly bring me into the story. I felt like
Mhm.
I was it felt like I was watching a movie in 1997, though today it doesn't hold up quite as well.
Yeah. I mean, it
But
was mind blowing at the time graphically, which is funny to think of now. Like it was literally the person was like, buy a PlayStation, buy Final Fantasy VII when I
yeah,
was at the retro game store in '97. So,
I can't speak to the games after Final Fantasy VII because I have no nostalgia or experience with any of them. I haven't played a single Final Fantasy after Final Fantasy
oh
VII.
wow, really?
Yeah, I
I loved Seven. I still love Seven. I think the story is interesting, and I think it does hold up today in a lot of ways. But eight for me was just too whiny and boring. Like 10, I just was not a fan of the story. But people love those games, so I mean, it's a real tough question to answer, because like it just depends on your tastes.
I think if I were going to play another Final Fantasy, a more modern one, I'd probably jump straight to 15 personally. Like,
Yeah,
you
me
know,
too.
I got to learn about Nissen Cup Noodle. I have to understand
I don't know
uh
what that is, but sure.
it's the all right, sorry. Like a much like a frog, when you dissect a joke it kills it, but I'll
Yeah, that's
explain it.
fine.
Yeah, so Nissen Cup Noodle was a sponsor for the game, so like every time you're going through the game, like if you stop at a
You
campsite
see
or
them,
something,
yeah.
one of the characters is like, have you tried Nissen Cup Noodle? It has great flavor. And it's just
That's actually pretty funny still. That's an interesting thing. That's interesting. I did not know that those kind of advertisements were being put in our video games now.
oh
That's
yeah,
great. So oh dear, SML2, just destroyer of worlds. Go follow him.
pure
Says,
speed legend.
did you ever find yourself bursting out in laughter in a rather tragic scene because of the minimal and rather technical dialogue?
Yeah, Willie dying.
Um, I mean, I find Willie dying hilarious every time it happens because it's just like we just met him and like we're just so sad that he died. And I'm just like, I don't know. I mean, we don't know what Willie's life's like. He could be terrible. He could have deserved what he got. I don't know. We don't even know how he died. It doesn't even tell. He's just dying when we find him. We don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I do
He
find that
already had
stuff
a
kind of
pretty
funny.
severe cold. We all kind of saw it coming.
It is funny, especially in these like older games where they like make you fill in the story in your brain. You know what I'm saying? Like they don't do the character development. They just kind of like do it in one sentence and
We
like
assure
your
you, you already
imagination
knew
fills
Willie at
in the
this point.
gaps. Yeah,
We
your
promise
imagination
you
fills
already
in the
knew him.
gaps.
We promise he was an important character.
Yeah, we have no clue how terrible Willie could have been. We don't know. So
All right, so Space Cow wants us to both pronounce the word Aegis out loud again. We did say it several times in the speedrun discussion, and I believe that I know the correct pronunciation of this word, but now with
I'm
Space
pretty
Cow
sure
saying
you're
that, I
right
think
now that I
was
look
wrong.
at it. You're the worst.
Yeah.
I was saying Aegis, but it's probably Aegis.
So the way I've always heard it pronounced by people who correct other people, which are the best kind of people, is Aegis. That's the way I've always seen it pronounced. Yeah. So it's like a long E sound for AE, like Caesar. Whether or not that's actually correct in context, because this is a Latin word, I don't know. I mean, Aegis is the Latin word for shield. So I don't know.
I think Aegis is the Latin word for never drops when I'm on a good run. Because I've had like 3 runs the other day where I would be 2 minutes ahead, 3 minutes ahead, going to go into Julius, and all I wanted was this stupid shield to drop. And 2 minutes of grinding later, it still hadn't dropped. I'm trying to fight him at level 19. Now I'm like level 23 because I'm just trying to get the shield. It's a frustrating game. So that's what I think Aegis stands for. But Aegis, Aegis, you know, whatever. I don't know. Space Cow says Aegis, so Aegis. No, he says Aegis. I don't know, man.
It's a funny word.
It's a funny word.
Hey,
so thank you guys so much.
You guys listen so you can hear us say the funny words in funny ways.
Thank you guys so much for hanging out here in the Twitch channel. We've had some subs, we've gotten some bits. We really appreciate the support. It's been fun doing these live streams. So we appreciate you going through this game with us. Definitely follow Bowie the Hero, who did help us a bunch with this episode, even though he's not here. He answered every question that we had. He really wanted to be, but it is like 4 a.m. where he lives now. So
at this point, it's about 3 a.m.
Up at 8. Not really fair. He even considered taking a nap. That's how passionate he is about this game. So
yeah, he's a huge lover of Seiken Densetsu 1. This is a serious passion for him. So if you want to see someone be as passionate about this game as possible, he's going to be your guy. Also, definitely, I would recommend that you check out Opus, another fantastic runner of this game. He made the tutorial. He's a really entertaining speedrunner, a true legend at Zelda 2, and a true legend at this game as well. So check out Opus
maybe we can have Bowie on for Illusion to Gaia, because I love that game. That's why I followed him, and that is another great game, and he passionately runs that. So definitely follow him. Where can people follow you if they want to watch you play Secret Scout and never beat Chrono Trigger?
Why do you lean so hard on Secret Scout? Why is that your game of choice? I've played a lot of terrible stuff. Secret Scout seems like bullying to me at this point.
Okay, what about Pear and the Grey Witch?
All right, go back to Secret Scout. Go back to Secret Scout. All right, if you want to watch all of my dumb stuff, you can watch me at twitch.tv/authorblues. You can find all of my videos on youtube.com/authorblues. And you can see me say stupid stuff at twitter.com/authorblues. Where can they find you, John?
You can find me at John Carls on Twitter and Twitch. You can find me at John Carls1 on YouTube. Huge shout out to our Patreon contributors. People support us. It helps us pay for our hosting and for our editing and all sorts of different things for the podcast. So I want to give a special thanks to our $25 a month patrons. We've got Tina Hacks. You've heard her. She was on the Shantae episode. She ran Wonder Boy at GDQ. She does Final Fantasy VI. She is an awesome speedrunner. Go follow her at Twitch.
She just got partner too.
She just got partner. Go bop that sub button.
All of the success from being plugged on the Frame Savers has really skyrocketed her straight into partnership.
I'm gonna be interested to see how I emotionally handle when the Frame Savers gets partnered before me, but that's a whole different discussion. Huge shout out to Mr. Pizak. He's a classic retro speedrunner. He's at MRPZAK. And then we got our boy Kip at twitch.tv/KIPP. He's a Super Metroid speedrunner. He hosts a Super Metroid strat chat every other Thursday on his stream. So you can go to that and see some top runners and explain how to do certain tricks and stuff. It's really cool. Also, just if you're looking for any of our stuff, you can go to theframesavers.com. It has links to our Discord and our Twitter and all those things. Lastly, a couple quick plugs. I want to give a shout out to the Warp World podcast that are friends of ours. They can be found at podcast.warp.world. They do a lot of more modern Twitch news, modern gaming news. Really good podcast with Grand Pooh Bear, Jakku, and X Water. Go give them a listen. They're good friends of ours. Tell them that we sent you. You can also please follow Brian Morgenthaler at BMorgs TV on Twitter and Twitch. He makes this podcast happen by producing it and editing it, and we love him very much. We would not be doing this 2.5 years later if it weren't for him. And lastly, thanks for Space Cow doing some live Q&A for us. It's definitely a huge help.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts?
Yeah, we haven't plugged it in a while, but definitely check us out on iTunes and leave us a review and comment if you haven't done so recently. It does help to promote the podcast in ways that you can't possibly imagine. It helps us appear higher on listings, which gets us more listeners. So we really appreciate any time that you are able to do that. If you haven't done it yet, definitely check us out on iTunes and leave us a comment.
And thank you to anybody who subs to us or donates to us on Twitch. That's another way to support us, and we really appreciate it. So, last thoughts, I would say the Game Boy is amazing, and you should play this game, except I wouldn't play it on an actual Game Boy because nobody can see the screen on that thing. So, play it on your Super Nintendo.
Yeah.
Game Boy is a great system to exist in your Super Nintendo.
All right.
So,
take it easy.
Thanks, guys, so much, and we'll see you soon. Bye.